Hi, it's Mike at Farming Smarter, and we're doing another plot shot here. This week we're with Dr. Jan Slasky rotational study, and this is year 2 of 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at our specialty crop. In this case, it's going to be quinoa, and we're going to see how that fits on all the different previous stubbles. So going this way, we've got previous stubbles of quinoa, durum, dry bean, canola, barley, corn, pea, wheat, and hemp, moving all the way down the field. And then what we've done is we've seeded those same crops in a matrix so that we can get every combination of each one. So we're going to focus on the quinoa here today, and I'm going to take you through each plot and kind of show you some of the nuance from having all those previous stubbles. Now, when it comes to growing quinoa, we've only been doing this a couple of years ourselves. It's a really fun and interesting thing. And some of the things that we've learned is the stubble does make a really big difference in the success of our crop. And then when it comes to seedling establishment, that's pretty critical to have a really good seed bed prep to make sure you don't have weed issues later. The only products really registered are like a grassy in-crop spray like a Sure or I'm not even sure if Post or not. So there's not really control for the broadleaf weeds because quinoa is so closely related to lamb's quarters. It's a real challenge to get herbicides that will work on all the weeds and not hurt the quinoa. So seed bed prep is really important, and one of the things that we focused on a lot this year was making sure we had a good shot of water and we had a whole bunch of flush of weeds come up, burn them off and seed right away. And I think that was really key in getting this crop established. The other big important thing is insects, and we'll talk about that in another video. So let's check out the plots. Integrating a new crop into your rotation is a challenge, and lots of times crops like cereals are easy because they work after just about anything, but integrating something like quinoa is a little more difficult. So this first plot we have here, this is quinoa and quinoa stubble, and usually a crop on itself is not recommended. You can see there's a little bit of weeds poking through, but otherwise it's actually not as bad as I expected it to be. I think if we went to some of the other reps, they were a little bit weedier with the quinoa and some of our previous crops. So we're doing some crop biomass across, and they were a little bit weedier as well. So come on, I'll show you a little closer look. So one of the data points we're collecting for this trial is obviously the weed biomass, the crop biomass, the volunteer biomass, and volunteer counts. And so what we've done here is we've got 2 1-meter rows that we've cut out. We've cut the quinoa and taken a fresh weight. And then in between those, we've done a count on all these weeds, and then also a fresh weight on the weeds and volunteers. So if we notice, the challenge in this one is going to be determining quinoa and quinoa. So everything, obviously, where it's not in the row is going to be a volunteer. And then we've got a lot of little weeds like this, but the quinoa actually came up pretty good. We had a nice burn off here, and choked out a lot of the weeds better than I thought. The biggest difference between this and the other crops that we're going to see is because we had quinoa on here going the other direction last year, it's really kind of hard to determine the rows. We don't have nice straight uniform rows because we have a lot of quinoa like this one coming up in between things. So that's a bit of a challenge for doing the data here. And then there's some kochias popping through that you can see, and as well as some sow thistle is our main 2 concerns here. So moving on, if you're new to growing quinoa, your recommendations are going to be to grow it on a cereal. So this is quinoa on durum. Already I can see and feel, probably on camera, I'm not sure if it picks up, this is a lot taller. So we did some height measurements on all this as well. This quinoa is a lot thicker stand. Even the plants themselves are a lot more robust, so that's probably one of the benefits of not having it on its same crop. As well as the weed control, you can see there's a few sporadic kochias, but this looks really, really good in terms of quinoa fields. Commercial farmers are expecting close to 30% as a dockage for a good dockage pulling this off, so I think we might even be better than that here. So our next stubble is dry bean stubble. And our dry bean has been one of the crops that when we looked at first year results, we saw it was a winner for most of the other subsequent crops. Obviously beans are going to help with the nitrogen the following years, beans and peas. And it just seemed like a really good crop. There's a little bit of weeds coming through here, a little more than I expected. And I think that's maybe just the challenge with the products that we chose from the previous year. So moving on, we're on to canola now. And I think already you can see we've got a lot more challenges with the weeds here. Canola is a relatively clean crop for us, but I think in our case we've been potentially some tolerance issues in this field that we're at in terms of like group 249 resistance. And then you can even see just compared to the last the durum plot and the bean plot, there's quite a few lower, more marginal areas, not as developed. Plants aren't nearly as robust, and I think we're seeing some of that negative mycorrhizal effect on the quinoa in this plot. So definitely not something that is recommended. I know some producers that have done this, and just as kind of their first kick at the cat, but this is probably not the best in terms of the other options. So moving on to barley, this is another one of our cereals. You can see again right away, we had really good weed control in the year previous. Nice uniform crop across here. There's none of those really kind of marginal or weak areas. The plants are relatively tall, weed-free, and it looks really good. So now we've got our corn stubble. This stubble is causing a number of issues compared to some of the other crops. Obviously, we're seeing a height reduction here again, and the weed situation looks okay. We're usually fairly clean in our corn years previous, but I can tell I think this yield's going to be down 10 or maybe 20%. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Now this is something that I didn't have recommended to me or to us when we were growing quinoa, but right now it looks like the winner to me. It's nice and tall. I could feel the crop growing as I drove by compared to everything else. The plants are just really robust and I think nice and uniform. I'm really happy with this, and this is our pea stubble, and I think we're really seeing the benefit of having the peas grown here early. I think one of the concerns used to be weed control, but in our peas in this entire strip here in years past, we've had really good weed control. We've been using like extended weed control products before pre-seed, things like Authority, and then getting really good in-season control with our weeds. So it's a relatively clean plot, plus the benefit of having a pulse before. I think this could be something that we look at and kind of compare with the cereals to see if maybe there's even a benefit here compared. Now we're on to wheat, and this is again a really good looking crop of quinoa. There's maybe a little spot there where it's not the best, but I'd be relatively happy with this, and this is kind of what I'd consider the check type treatment. So anything that doesn't look as good as this probably isn't going to be something that you want to do. That'd be things like the quinoa and quinoa, the quinoa and canola, quinoa on corn, things like that. And then if you can do better, I mean that's awesome. Oh, this weedy mess here, hey? So I mean, I have to show you this plot. I don't want to. I really don't even want to try and harvest it, but you can see this is our quinoa on hemp. I was a little surprised to see it so weedy. I mean, our hemp plots tend to be relatively clean no matter what they're grown on. I can show you some of the hemp over there after. It's all relatively clean, but I think just because of our weed seed bank and things like that, the kochia just kind of snuck up here a little more than we would have wanted, and obviously we didn't have great control on it in the year past. So I think we've seen from last year's results as well, you know, when you're mixing hemp, quinoa, potatoes, any other specialty type crops that you might be doing, it's really tricky to get that combination right. And you know, having something like a cereal in there to kind of mitigate all those, you know, all those effects is a really good idea.